Now, if there was ever an award for shifting the goalposts the most, the right-wing global warming skeptic position might actually take the cake for that. Because if you look at it over the years, there have been so many changes to the standard talking points by people who don't believe in global warming that it's just gotten ridiculous. Like, first it was there is no global warming. Then it was, well, global warming might be happening, but it's not man made. And now the latest talking point, and quite possibly the stupidest, is global warming is actually a good thing. Now, I shouldn't even have to make this video because whether or not you believe in global warming, the idea that it's not a good thing should be self-evident. Like, even if you think that global warming is a hoax, like, you should at least be rational enough to think, well, yeah, it is, but if it was happening, it would be bad. Like, it should be, like, patently obvious to see why it would be bad. However, because there are many people out there who are insisting now that global warming is actually a good thing, I'm going to do this video to outline why it's not. Okay, number one, the types of temperatures we're talking about. We're not just talking, they say like the Earth will warm by 2 degrees or whatever in 100 years. That number doesn't tell the whole story because even if it warms overall by 2 degrees in 100 years, that hides the fact that in some places it will warm more than that. And what it also means is that the extreme temperatures could be a great deal higher in magnitude than 2 degrees higher than what they were before. And for instance, we've seen some heat waves that are downright awful. Like for instance, last year in British Columbia, it got to 49 degrees Celsius, which is, I think, 5 degrees hotter than the previous record for Canada. It broke, I think, all the records for like north of a certain point, and it was like really, really far north of the place that previously held the record. So it's like, that was really out of the ordinary, but yet this summer we've had some repeats of it. We've had 40-degree weather in Portland, Oregon, which would have been unheard of only a few years ago. 40-degree weather in Paris and in London, and I think across China also. Like this, and I think even in Vancouver, it's gotten close to 40 degrees. It definitely did last year. This isn't normal heat. We're not just talking like a little bit hotter. We're talking like extreme heat waves. And 40 degrees Celsius is just not comfortable weather. I know some people like hot weather more than others, but I don't think almost anyone actually likes 40 degrees Celsius. I think if you claim to enjoy 40 degrees Celsius weather, you're either lying or you're insane. Like, honestly, I don't think even most black people or most Arabs enjoy 40 degrees Celsius, or most Latin Americans. Like, I don't think people even from tropical countries think that 40 degrees Celsius is nice weather. Like, that's the kind of weather where everybody gets their bitch on, no matter how dark you are. Like, that is just shit weather. So that's the first thing, like the degree of heat we're talking about. Secondly, crop failure. The fact is, changing circumstances in weather result in changes to the very delicate ecosystems we have in many places. And that means crop failure, because it's not like the ecosystem will magically, instantaneously adapt in all cases, and that you can simply grow warmer weather crops, because there could be other situations preventing that. Like for instance, also it involves a lot of drought in some regions is what we've been seeing, flooding in others. I admit I'm not a scientist. I don't know entirely how it works. Like, why is it that climate change results in drought in some regions and flooding in others? But that's what we've been seeing lately. Like, ultimately, as I've said many times on global warming, why do I believe in it? Because I trust what I see with my own eyes. That's honestly like my number one reason. Not because I believe scientists, because a lot of scientists do lie about things. I believe it because it just makes fucking sense. My intuition tells me that it's true. Based on what I see with my own eyes, what I feel with my senses, what I see. Well, I look up regularly on Google. I look up like weather reports from cities all around the world just to get an idea of like what the climate's actually like there and how it's changing. And I also cross-reference that with like on Wikipedia, they have the data historically of what the highs and lows there are historically. And it's obvious that in many places in the world, they're getting levels of heat that are just historically unprecedented. Particularly the Pacific Northwest, Europe, like Northern Europe in particular. Not so much Scandinavia, a bit Scandinavia, but more so like I would say England, France, Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, countries like that are getting historically unprecedented heat waves. When I was in Europe in 2015, it got up to 38 Celsius on numerous days. When I was in the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Netherlands even, I think got to like 36 or 37. It wasn't actually as bad as it would be here because I think the humidity was a bit lower there, but it still was pretty fucking hot. I wouldn't want it to be hotter than that. I like 40 Celsius, fuck that shit. Fuck that shit. So like, yeah, that's another thing. Another argument is that there are other consequences of warmer weather, like forest fires, for instance. There's been a dramatic increase in forest fires in North America, I believe also in Siberia, possibly, I think, in Europe, Australia as well. And like definitely Australia, but possibly, I think, parts of Europe. Now, forest fires are just shitty. Like having widespread forest fires, it makes the air all smoky. It's disgusting. Like breathing in, I've been in places where was forest fire smoke before, and it's disgusting. Like breathing in the air, it feels really gross. You feel it in your lungs. You feel it in your eyes. It's shitty. It's not a good situation to be in, and it's going to result in more of that, like more forest fires and more smoke. Because these regions have types of trees that are not really adapted to constant hot weather with no rain, and trees like in this image here, and those kinds of trees are particularly vulnerable to it. And that's what we're going to see more of as a result of this, more fucking forest fires. And forest fires are bad for so many. I mean, I know they're part of nature to some extent, but like just excessive forest fires are definitely a bad thing because the air is just completely full of smoke. It's gross. It's toxic. It just makes everything look disgusting, like all these burned trees everywhere. It looks ugly. And also it's just not a nice situation to live around, like constantly worrying about your home being burned down or the city or town you live in getting burned down. I mean, I guess it wouldn't be a concern so much in a big city, but it might be a concern in a small town. Like we saw the town of Lytton in British Columbia got completely burned down right after they had the 49-degree weather last year. So there's that, like forest fires. Like again, like not every ecosystem is adapted to hot weather. And that's what happens when you get hot weather in an ecosystem that isn't really adapted so much to it, is like you get these absurd apocalyptic levels of forest fires. Another thing is rising sea levels. That is something that is also a concern. I don't know what time frame that's happening on, but I mean there has been some flooding in low-lying coastal areas recently, like parts of the U.S. and I think Venice has seen more flooding lately, and of course New Orleans. That city's just on a ticking clock. I mean, yeah. But there's flooding. There's also glaciers melting. Glaciers melting produces flooding. Like there's been flooding in the Rocky Mountains because of glaciers melting so much. I was actually really lucky. I was able to go on this one trail, the Berg Lake Trail, before the floods happened. And I was really lucky for that reason because honestly, it closed like the next year because of the flooding. So like that right there was really good luck on my part. But yeah, I mean it closed because the glaciers melting, because it was so hot the next year that glaciers started melting at an absurd rate, which created floodwaters that took out the bridges on the trail and took out a great portion of the trail itself. So like that is something that is happening, like glaciers melting, flooding from that. It's just a fucking mess. And also another thing, like I know they talk about climate refugees. Now I do agree that the whole climate refugee thing is somewhat of a hoax because it's like these people are going to migrate to Western countries anyway, which is absolutely true. These people will immigrate here no matter what, or they'll try to, and in many cases will succeed. But it is possible that climate change could mean even more of them will. It is possible. And I mean, yeah, there's some gaslighting involved by pretending that like, oh, but if we stop climate change, the migration will stop. No, it won't. It'll keep on forever until we actually like impose laws to stop it. But yes, it could make it worse because absolutely certain parts of the third world will become borderline uninhabitable because of the weather just being too hot. Like even dark-skinned people, like they prefer hot weather. They hate cold, but even they have their limits. If it's fucking 45 degrees Celsius and humid every day, as it is projected to be in parts of Africa, fuck that. Nobody wants to live in 45 Celsius humid fucking weather. Like, I guess somehow the Arabs can tolerate that in dry weather in the Persian Gulf, which I think is insane. But I guarantee, like, everybody has their limits. Like, there are certain levels of hot weather that nobody wants to fucking live in. So, I mean, there's all these things. Like, these are all legitimate concerns. It's not just going to be like, oh, Alaska is going to become this place with nice weather. Global warming is great. And it's also like, okay, if you believe it, then in a long enough timeline, everywhere will become too hot. Like, if global warming just continues forever, then yeah, maybe Alaska will have nicer weather briefly if you ignore the forest fires and stuff. But like, eventually it'll become too hot too, like on a long enough timeline. So like on a long enough timeline, it will destroy the world one way or another. Like if you just let it go unabated forever, like if the temperature keeps going up 2 degrees every century, eventually the world will just become uninhabitable on a long enough timeline. That's just the facts. So, I mean, there's just so many things that are wrong with this. And the biggest thing that's wrong with it is, frankly, it shows cognitive dissonance because a lot of right wingers, when it comes to architecture, and when it comes to culture, they acknowledge that change for the sake of change is a bad thing. Like fucking up something that has existed for hundreds of years because, oh, change, we want change, can ruin delicate cultural ecosystems. It can ruin our heritage. And it's like, okay, the same applies to nature. Fucking up all these delicate ecosystems that have existed for eons because you don't like cold weather. Maybe that could fuck it up too. And that's another thing. Like all these people LARP about Hyperborea and stuff, but then they say, actually, we hate cold weather. Like, what's up with that? Like, I mean, I guess maybe it's not the same right wingers. Like maybe the ones who LARP about Hyperborea are more the Wignats. And the ones who say they like global warming are more the AMNATs. I guess maybe there's like they want the whole world to have the same climate as the American South or the American Southwest. I guess maybe. I don't know. But either way, like, I mean, honestly, it's just such a terrible argument.